Hello, friends. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. All right. Can I get some spreadsheets in the chat? All right. We are drinking Michelob Ultra tonight. It's the only beer I've been drinking for like too long. Got the wedding here in less than 2 months. We're on the home stretch. Been drinking Michelob Ultra as part of the wedding diet. 2.6 carbs, 95 calories. Michelob Ultra, superior light beer. We're here if you want to sponsor us. All right. Looks like you guys are ready because we got a lot of people in here already. So we'll just get right to it. I'm sure people will be trickling in. Let me know what you're drinking, as always. What do we got? What do we got? What are people drinking? Well, Mountain Dew, Jack and Coke, Milk, Voodoo Ranger. It's a great beer. Natty Light, classic. Had a few of those in my day. Coors Light. Little Monster. Got a question, live band or DJ at the wedding? I got a little combo going on. Found this company called Second City, and they do DJs with live instrumental compliments. So gonna have the DJ going with a little live sax, a little live percussion. Honestly, I needed to have a DJ because late night, like 9 p.m., I'm gonna need some house bangers, as you guys are well aware of. And the live band playing Avicii just doesn't get there. Doesn't hit the same. So we're having a DJ with some live instruments to accompany the DJ. All right, we got a Pepsi Max, Vanilla Coke, Sapporo, great Japanese beer. Heineken, can't go wrong there. Blue Moon, can't go wrong there. Little orange wines, classy stuff right there. Little Guinness to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Rumpelmans. Love me a Rumpelmans shot on the mountain if I'm snowboarding. Little Yingling. Cherry Coke. Kona Big Wave, that's a great beer. Red Stripe, love me some Red Stripe. Topo Chico, keeping it alcohol free. We love that. 805. Sierra Nevada, hazy little thing. Great beer. Oh, I almost just drank that the wrong way. Golden Monkey Triple. That'll get the blood flowing. Those are like, what, 9%? Rolling Rock. Kirkland Hard Seltzer. Kenneth Kirkland. Athletic Brew. So my parents actually turned me on to Athletic Brews. Non-alcoholic beer. Actually great if like you're not trying to drink alcohol. I feel like they taste really good. I enjoy them. Harlan Japanese Lager. I feel like I did that in a stream once, didn't I? Hopefully I turned you on to that. All right. We got people in the stream. I'm going to close my window so everyone doesn't hear me spewing off takes here. So we have like a lot to get to. So I figured how we'll start is just shoot me your questions. Let me know where you guys want me to start. Obviously, a lot's happened in the last week between, Mike Williams getting cut, the restructures with Joey and Khalil, Keenan obviously getting traded. We've had a bunch of signings here with, Gus Edwards, Will Dissly, Alohi Gilman getting re-signed, Hayden Hurst, Easton Stick re-signing, Puna Ford, Troy Dye, Denzel Perryman, Bradley Bozeman getting signed today. So you guys let me know where you want to start. We can get into some cap stuff. We can get into the decisions made, everything. But there's so much to get to that. I figure we'll just start with what you guys want to do. So let me know in the chat. Seen some Keenan. We can start with Keenan if you guys want. So what I will say is I wrote, my full take on what happened with Keenan. Link is below. If you don't subscribe to The Athletic, click that link, subscribe. Let's just go through the big four, because that was obviously, let's go through that. We can start there, and then we can dive into some more specific questions. So yeah, I mean, anyone that was reading me, I wrote a big piece back in January, sort of laying out like, okay, here's the situation. You had 4 veterans, all with cap hits of over $30 million. The 2 receivers in Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, the 2 edge rushers in Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. And together they were accounting for over $140 million in cap space. What I was working with was a projected cap of $242 million. It ended up being announced at $255.4 million. That was almost a $30 million increase year over year on the cap. Still, even with that, those 4 were taking up well over 50% of the cap, and that's just not tenable. And so I went through back in January, like, here's the situation. They're going to have to make decisions on these 4 guys. Here are all the options that they have to sort of figure it out. And ultimately, the decisions that they ended up making were they cut Mike Williams to save $20 million in cap space. That felt like the likeliest thing. It was hard to see them doing an extension with Mike, considering that he's coming off the ACL. They cut him. He's a free agent now. He's on the open market. He's going to take some meetings. I think the Steelers have been reported, the Jets this week. But there's always the possibility that he could come back to the Chargers. Just at the cap number he was at $32 million, it just wasn't tenable. And so they made that move ahead of the new league year to get cap compliant. They needed to clear at least $19.55 million in space by that deadline. They cut Mike, and they were cap compliant. And then, they started making moves elsewhere. Now, in that piece in January that I wrote, I laid out, what it would look like if they did restructures with void years. And so to explain what void years are, they're basically just dummy years in a contract that teams can add in. And the sole purpose of using void years is just to add years that you can use to prorate signing bonus. And so when a contract is signed, a player gets a signing bonus, that's money up front. That money can be prorated over the length of the deal up to 5 years for cap purposes. So if you sign a 4-year contract and you have a $20 million signing bonus, that means there's $5 million of signing bonus in each year of the contract. Now, there's other things that can be prorated as well. Option bonuses, for example, can be prorated. These are all just cap mechanisms that teams use to move money around and become cap compliant. Justin Herbert, for example, has 2 option bonuses in his big deal. One $45 million, one $50 million, one's this year, one's next year. That allows you to prorate once the option bonus hits. So instead of it starting at the beginning of the contract, it starts whenever the option bonus is. So for Herbert, one of them will happen this year, the other one will happen next year. It'll start proration in 2024, or for the one next year in 2025. And so what I laid out in that piece in January was they can use void years on contracts to then turn base salary into signing bonus and divide that over the number of years through the void years. So they ended up doing that with Khalil Mack. They added a void year onto his contract, and they ended up, turning base salary into signing bonus and prorating. But with Joey and Khalil, what happened was the team approached them about not only restructuring, which is turning base salary into signing bonus, base salary or roster bonus, but also taking a pay cut. Now, these are 2 different things, and I feel like these get conflated sometimes, so it's worth explaining. A restructure typically is when you take either base salary or roster bonus, which together, effectively means salary, and turning that into signing bonus so it can be prorated. A pay cut is different. That is asking a player to take less money. That is pure cash savings. So like in, Joey Bosa's case, he took a $7 million pay cut, which means that that's money that he's just not getting. And then the team did the restructure after Joey took the pay cut. Same thing with Khalil. He's, took a pay cut of $4.25 million. So they were able to do both of those restructures after pay cuts. So they saved $11.25 million. This is according to NFL Network's reporting. And now we can see it on Over the Cap as well. It's first reported by Tom Pelissero of NFL Network. They saved that $11.25 million even before they did the restructure to then spread money out over, in Khalil's case, an extra void year, and in Joey's case, the length of the deal. Now, what happened was they went to Keenan with a similar structure. effectively, hey, we want to cut your salary and then do a restructure. And as Keenan said himself, but as I reported, late last week after the trade went down, Keenan Allen in his mind was coming off the best season of his career. I tend to agree with him that it was one of, if not the best seasons of his career, and he wasn't gonna do a pay cut. Like, that's his prerogative. Like, he's allowed to do that. And I don't necessarily think he's wrong for saying, hey, like, I'm not going to take a pay cut after I just had the best season of my career. Like, that makes sense to me. But when you do that and the team is in a situation where they feel like they need you to take a pay cut in order to either save cash or cap or both, I think that was the case with the Chargers here where they needed to save both, then they now can go shop you. They can try and trade you. I don't think that either side is wrong here. That's not my position to say whether one side is wrong or the other. I can see both sides, but that's what happened. And so they ended up, after they went to Keenan, asked him to take the pay cut. He declined. That's when trade talks picked up, as I reported on Friday, and they were able to find a partner in the Bears. Now, the question is, right, like, is a 4th round pick enough? That had to be what the market was. The question is, did they give themselves enough time to find the best deal out there? I was told, from people that I know in the league that they expressed some surprise at the return, and there was a feeling that there maybe could have been more offered in return, but ultimately what they ended up with was a 4th round pick in return, and that cleared $23.1 million in cap space. And now I think a lot of the questions were, well, like, what are they going to use the space on? Why would they do this? It wasn't a situation where they had to do it. Like, because they obviously went to Keenan and felt like there was a situation in their mind where they could have kept him at a certain price and a certain cap hit. But ultimately, they did the deal because they couldn't get to that number through negotiations, and now they have this space to use. Now, if they'd done the trade earlier, they might have been able to be more aggressive in free agency and go after some of these bigger names that were off the board by the time they did their trade. But all along, with where the roster was at, it was going to be really difficult for the Chargers, even if they cleared all of this space, to then go attack the very top of the market at any position. Like, what they really needed to do, before any of these moves were made, they were really tight against the cap, and they were going to have to really do some bargain hunting. Now they've given themselves some more, flexibility to really fill out the depth of the roster. And what you're seeing here is that's exactly what they're doing, right? They're signing a bunch of relatively cheap contracts to fill out their depth. Now, we haven't seen numbers on some of these, but, you look at some of the contracts they're already in, like Gus Edwards at a $2.25 million cap hit, Will Dissly at a $2.625 million cap hit, Alohi Gilman at a $3.375 million cap hit. I cannot see any of these signings they've made exceeding $3, maybe $4 million in 2024 cap hit. And what they've done is they've really addressed a number of different positions where they felt like they needed depth with some veteran free agent signings. They found a guy in Bradley Bozeman who's not going to count against the comp pick formula because he was cut by the Panthers. And he's a guy that's played, over 2,000 snaps at center in his career, a guy that can come in and be a bridge if you do draft a center in 2nd round or 3rd round or wherever they end up drafting a center. They signed 2 linebackers. They needed linebackers. Kenneth Murray signed with the Titans. Eric Kendricks was a cap casualty. So they had Deion Henley and Nick Neiman on the roster. They needed way more depth there. Now they have 4 linebackers, including 2 veterans with some experience. They go out and they sign Poona Ford to add to a defensive line room that was, super thin. They signed 2 tight ends. The Chargers have a professional blocking tight end for the first time in a very, very long time, probably since Virgil Green. Hunter Henry, probably. Those 2 guys. I think they left in actually the same year. But you're talking about, 2020 was probably the last time where they had a really functional blocker at that position. It's something I've talked about on here at length. It's something that I've written about. For whatever reason, the previous regime never went and found the veteran guy. They did invest a 3rd round pick in Trey McKitty with the thought that they could develop him into a professional blocker. That never happened. And so, there are more moves coming here. That's my guess. considering like where my sheet is at right now, factoring in what they'll need to pay in season, factoring in draft pick compensation, they still have about 12 million. That's a rough projection, obviously, 12 million to work with, where they can go out and potentially sign a corner because they need a corner, or they can potentially go sign a receiver, with where their room is right now, moving on from Keenan and Mike, assuming Mike doesn't come back. That receiver could be Mike, who knows? And so they've given themselves flexibility here to really build out the depth of the roster and free agency and give themselves, more flexibility here moving into the draft. Like, you don't want to go into the draft saying, like, okay, we need a corner, we need a linebacker, we need this and this and this, because then you're pigeonholing yourself. The more depth that you're able to build out heading into the draft, more positions you can fill. It's going to give you more flexibility to attack different positions and really use that best player available approach that, the Ravens have actually abided by throughout the Ozzie Newsome era, and that's where Joe Ortiz came from. And so to give yourself the ability to really take that best player available approach, I think that's what you're looking at right now. So that's, I guess, like a long-winded way of like what actually went down. We can get into more specifics of it, but fire away with your questions. I haven't really been looking at the chat, so if you have a question, just fire it in there now. We can get to it. Just jump into the bottom here. Wide receiver, a lot more believable now to take at 5. I always felt like it was believable. Now it's like more of a need, I guess, is how I would characterize it. But, going back to what I was just talking about, like best player available approach, like Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze being there at 5, like it's hard to see anybody else jumping in there as like a best player available pick ahead of those guys. Like, I think I said this on the Chargers Weekly podcast I did with Money, but I was watching some of Malik Neighbors, and man, that guy is just different. Like, he just jumps off the screen. Like, he's incredibly special. And so, like, I think beforehand, like even before any of this stuff happened, like I think receiver at 5 made a lot of sense. Just looking at like what the Bengals did with Jamar Chase, for example, and really loading up on a position, what that allowed them to do. Now it's like it's even more of a marriage between, need and value at that spot. So, we'll see what happens here. Like, we'll see if they end up signing a receiver. Tyler Boyd's a guy that does make a lot of sense as like a Keenan Allen replacement. Really good slot receiver, good route runner. Not at Keenan's level, obviously, but he's that type of player who could fit in there. But I don't think they're even pigeonholed to like going after like a slot guy, because I've seen Josh Palmer play in there, and I think he does a really good job as a slot receiver. And really good in the middle of the field, really good route runner. Really good in contested catch situations, tough, big. And so like I think they have options as far as which way they go. But I think receivers always made sense at 5 just because of like how good all of these receivers are, and even throwing Marvin Harrison Jr. in there. I think he's going to go 4. I'd be surprised if he doesn't, but you can throw those 3 guys together and say, okay, like if one of those guys is there at 5, like it made sense before, it probably makes even more sense now. Why not draft offensive line? I think it's a possibility too. I think the tackle class this year is kind of interesting because, at the combine specifically, having a lot of conversations about this, like there's, each team is going to have a different tackle atop their board. This is not a year where there's one or even two standout guys. Like I heard 5 different names, as far as who's going to be the first tackle off the board, between, Joe Alt, Fuaga, Latham, Mims. There's a bunch of tackles that are in there, and they all have Olufashanu as well. And so like there's a lot of guys that are that are good players, good prospects, but it's going to be like a pick your poison type thing. I guess like not really pick your poison, but what's your cup of tea is probably a better idiom to use, right? Like, what do you like? Do you like physicality? Do you like bruisers, right? Do you like athleticism? Do you like, size? Do you like more finesse players? Do you like more power players? Like, are you looking for more upside? Are you looking to take a swing? Like, are you looking for proven production? Like, it kind of is like, what is your philosophy? What kind of player are you looking for? And that could be the first tackle on your board. And so like when you're picking at 5, sure, is tackle an option at 5? Yeah. But because there are all of these guys that are kind of in the mix, like to me, tackle makes more sense in a trade down scenario where you can move back to somewhere between 8 and 13, maybe pick up a future first if you move back far enough. Maybe pick up more draft capital in 24, whether that's, multiple, day 2 picks, something like that. You can still get one of the tackles if you like multiple of them, and then you have more ammo to work with, whether that's this year or next year. But definitely an option at 5. Like I think, I think with the way they want to play, at least the way they've stated that they want to play, like I think they need to be investing in the offensive line consistently, to be able to run the football that they say that they want to, the way that they say they want to run the football, All right, this is a good question from Connor here. What happened? Did I start a stream when the Guilty as Charged guys were streaming? If I did, I'm sorry. I literally had no idea. Where's this question from Connor? All right, so this is a good question. Can you rank the external free agent signings by likelihood of being the week 1 starter? All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 signings that have either been announced or reported. So I'd say, Will Dissly probably leads that, leads these rankings. I think there's a very high likelihood that he's going to be a starter. Now is he going to be the number 1 tight end in 11 personnel? That's, to be determined, because he's obviously like they signed him to be a blocker. But if you're talking about, hey, like we're in 12 personnel and we're trying to run it, like I think that that's his role. Like that's why they signed him. Gus Edwards, I would probably rank him 2. Like I said this on the Chargers Weekly podcast as well, but like I think going out and signing J.K. Dobbins to like a veteran minimum contract with a bunch of incentives built in makes a ton of sense. He's obviously coming off an Achilles. He had an ACL 3 years ago, so he's had a lot of injuries. But as far as like a low risk, high upside signing, and signing a guy that you're very familiar with and is familiar with the scheme because of his time with Greg Roman, like that makes a lot of sense to me. But like right now with where things stand, Gus Edwards is obviously like the guy on the roster. And then let's say they draft a running back, and then you have Isaiah Spiller in the mix. Like to me, Edwards would have a clear line towards, starting playing time. Moving on, I would probably throw Poona Ford in there. Hayden Hurst, obviously with the tight ends that they have, those would probably be 3 and 4 to me. The defensive line depth chart is interesting. Let's pull it up. So, Morgan Fox, Tito Abonia, Scott Matlock, Chris Hinton. That's basically your group, So right now, as things stand, like, you feel like Poona Ford's sort of a shoe-in to be a starter. We'll see what happens in the draft and through the rest of free agency. I'd probably put Bradley Bozeman 5th. Right now, obviously, clear line to playing time. What I'd said all along that I think makes the most sense is, go sign a veteran kind of stopgap a guy that you feel comfortable starting if you don't end up with a center in the draft, but really make an effort to take a guy, Zach Frazier at West Virginia, for example, at 37, and then those two guys are competing. And so I'd have him at 5 because in my mind, what I'm envisioning is the Chargers draft a center, and there's some sort of competition going down there between those two guys in training camp. And then I'd probably list the linebackers after that. Dye to me feels like more of a special teams move. Denzel Perryman obviously has a lot of experience, and he might end up being the guy that starts. But Deion Henley was a 3rd-round pick. I think he got derailed a little bit last year by the hamstring injury. I think we might have seen a little bit more of him on defense if he hadn't, suffered that hamstring injury during the preseason. But he showed some stuff on special teams. Like, he looked like exactly the type of player that Chargers explained him as after they drafted him, which is, uber athlete, violent, good blitzer. You saw some of those blitzing skills, when he was rushing on the punt return team. He's got a great speed, sideline to sideline. He's a willing tackler, seeks out contact. One thing that we haven't seen a lot is, how will he play in coverage? So that's what I'll be looking for, like, through the spring and summer. And then Nick Niemann, I thought Nick Niemann played really well in some moments when he played last year. Obviously didn't play a lot because Eric Kendricks and Kenneth Murray were mostly healthy the whole year. Although Kenneth was playing through a shoulder injury. But the Vikings game, for example, was a really good game from Nick Niemann. If you remember, they won that game on a Kenneth Murray interception. It was Nick Niemann who forced the pass breakup that was tipped up in the air into Kenneth's arms. He knew, based on the situation, where they were in the field in the red zone. If you remember, Kirk Cousins went tempo there, went no huddle, and called his own play. Nick Niemann, I talked to him after that game, had really studied, what Kirk Cousins liked, knew this was a go-to play for Kirk Cousins in that field zone, and anticipated that Hockenson was going to be running that little stop route at the goal line and jump the pass. He's a really good special teams player. That's going to be his main contribution, I think. If we're talking about, like, what is he going to look like through the rest of his career, but, like, he showed me a little something on defense last year. And so we'll see how the linebacker room shakes out. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, you go get a veteran like Denzel Perryman, he's probably going to have an opportunity to start. But that's just off the cuff. That's sort of, my take on sort of the guys that they've signed. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of thoughts on Minnesota. Obviously they traded for that 23rd overall pick, presumably to get some more ammo to move up for a quarterback. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of trading back with Minnesota for 11 and 23. Just thinking about it, do they have to throw something else in? Maybe. But I mean, like, talking about the framework of that sort of deal, I can see it both ways here, honestly. Like, I think trading back, there's a lot of benefits to it. Like, I could sit here and make an argument for both of them, and I'm going to do that. Trading back, and you pick up the 23rd overall pick, you talk about, what the roster needs, right? Like, if you trade back there and you have 11 and 23, hypothetically, let's say you can get, one of these tackles to either, to compete there at right tackle with Trey Pipkins, to potentially move inside to guard, whatever it is, but some sort of, talent influx for the right side of the offensive line. And then at 23, wherever you want to go, corner, right? Defensive line, receiver, whatever it ends up being, now you're getting 2 blue chip prospects at 2 positions of need on a roster that needs that versus, taking the A1, A plus prospect at 5. Now, like the flip side of this is you trade down, you pick up additional capital, you get some more depth, you fill some more needs. Somebody else gets Malik Neighbors, and that guy has a 12-year career and, turns into what everyone thinks he's going to be and what it looks like he's going to be based on his college tape. And then the Chargers are looking on as, this receiver, the guy that they've needed for a long, long time as far as explosive play, big playability, that dynamic that they've just been missing in the receiver room. He's doing it for another team. And it shouldn't influence you, but I can see both sides. Like, hey, we want to go we want to stay at 5 and get this A1 receiver, or we want to trade back and potentially fill more needs. I think there are arguments to both sides. What it's going to depend on is, okay, who are the guys that they feel comfortable at 11 that they feel like are going to be there, and then who are the guys at 23, that they feel like are going to be there, and do those 2 guys together outweigh the potential of Malik Neighbors? It's a tough call. I don't know what I would do, honestly, because I can see benefits to both sides. Yeah. People making good points in here too that it doesn't have to be a tackle at 11. Terrion Arnold, is absolutely an option. I watched some film on him, just great coverage instincts. I loved what I saw from him, on film. I don't think he's, and this, is validated by, sort of the consensus in the draft community. He's not that top 5 type of prospect, but I love his coverage instincts. Obviously comes from a great background at Alabama that's produced a lot of great defensive backs. And so corner is definitely an option there. Corner is an interesting position. That's a position that I feel like they could double dip here and sign a guy in free agency, a guy like Arthur Mallette, who played in the Ravens scheme, and that scheme familiarity would be super beneficial, and played well in the slot there specifically, and potentially getting a guy in the draft as well. And certainly a possibility there if they do trade back to that 8 to 13 range, potentially getting a corner. Because you look at it, Asante Samuel Jr. is in the last year of his deal. Obviously has proven himself as a capable outside corner. What he brings to the table is his ball production. But all players have weaknesses, and with Asante, what you get in his ball production and his coverage skills, you lose a little bit in run defense and tackling. And then he's obviously, the way he plays, he's just prone to some coverage mistakes, whether he's trying to anticipate or he's trying to get the football. It's usually related to that. Him, trying to use his instincts to go get the ball, and then he gets put into a bad spot. And so, I think there's room for, a real true number 1 corner there. And then behind him on the depth chart, you have Dean Leonard, who played some really good football when he got a chance to play. Obviously, remember, Chargers made those sweeping changes to their secondary, brought in a bunch of young guys, and found a little bit of something for a 2 to 3 game stretch there. I think he's going to battle for some playing time. I liked what I saw from him. And then you have Jasir Taylor, who's played inside and outside, probably projects better as an inside player. They were really relying on him to be their slot guy last year once the Asante Samuel Jr. experiment didn't really pan out. And obviously ended up losing his job to Isang Bassi, when they made those big changes. And so you have some pieces there, but it feels like they really need to build out that depth. And then additionally, go find a guy that could potentially turn into that, number 1 type corner. Not a whole lot of guys, right, that you draft and on day 2 or day 3 that end up becoming that type of player. And so there's your explanation for why corner could make sense at 11. Bowers at 11. I mean, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but they did sign 2 tight ends in free agency. So that would indicate that the Bowers pick might be unlikelier than it was before free agency. But I think Bowers is going to be a great player. My issue that I've written about a good amount this offseason is that it's just tough to find the value on the contract if you take a tight end at 5. And I know a lot of people would say, well, he's not a tight end. He's he's an offensive weapon. I understand the logic there. But on the rookie deal, like if you take him at 5, he's going to be making $12 million. He's going to have a $12 million cap hit by the end of the contract. And in order for him to make good on that, like he's going to that's a top 5 salary in the NFL. Like he's going to have to be like a top 5 player at his position. And then, the second point is, well, maybe you can get that surplus value on the second deal. Yes, but he still has to be like Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews. Like he has to be producing at that level as like a number 1 receiver in terms of his receiving production, for that contract to be, a real steal, because he'd be getting paid like a 10 end, but producing like a number 1 receiver. So that's my hang up with Bowers at 5. At 11, though, it's completely different. Like he's going to be making $6 million in the 4th year of the rookie contract, $6 million cap hit. And so now you're saying, okay, like to make good on that contract, he just has to be like a, top 15 player at the position. That's very different, right? And then you're getting the potential surplus value on the contract on the rookie deal. And you can sort of find the logic there as far as taking Bowers at 11. So Bowers at 11 is certainly an option. I think he's going to be a really good player. And so, my big thing was like, okay, Bowers at 5 is a little bit difficult to get to that surplus value. So other than Derwin James, which player on offense and defense will most likely improve under this regime? One guy I threw out there when I was asked this question in a mailbag earlier this offseason was Zion Johnson. I just think and I talked about this as well on the Chargers Weekly podcast, but I think with a different approach offensively, like the one thing Greg Roman talked a lot about when we did, the introductory press conference with him, or, beat writer roundtable, he talked about I asked him, I was like, you've done this everywhere you've been. Like you've been coaching for 20 years in the league, and like everywhere you've been called plays, you've had, a top 5 rushing offense. Like, how do you do that? Like what on a broad level, like what are the things that you have to do to build a good rushing offense? And he talked a lot about you have to have intention. You have to have an identity. Like it has to be coached, and there has to be a philosophy that's translated and transmitted to the players that hey, we're going to run the football. And then you have to go do it. You got to call the runs, and it seems simple, but with the way the league is going, and especially when you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert, you can fall into a trap where, maybe you're putting the ball in his hands too often. Maybe you're becoming predictable. Maybe you're relying too much on your star quarterback and you're getting away from the runs. And you have to think about the human element of it, right? Like you're an offensive lineman, you're in there just getting beat up play after play after play. It's just, helmet to helmet, shoulder pads to shoulder pads, and you're just taking on some of the biggest human beings on earth. And, there is a rhythm component to it, where if you can call runs in succession, you can get that confidence going in your offensive line that, hey, my coaches believe in us as a group, as an offensive line, that we're going to be able to go ahead and move these people and create room for our runners to run. And if it doesn't work on 2 runs to be in the game, there's also a confidence aspect of, okay, well, they're not just going to get away from it because it doesn't work early. And there isn't this pressure to go, the first run of the game has to hit, because if we don't hit the first run, we're not going to get back to it. That's not going to be an issue with Greg Roman. Now we can talk about all the potential other issues that could pop up when you have that approach and you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert. But that philosophy, that intention that we are, the Chargers are going to say, we're going to run the football. We're going to be bullies. This is going to be our philosophy. This is going to be our identity. And we are going to get after it. Even if it doesn't work early, we're going to stick with it. what's that going to do for the players? And so bringing it back to Zion Johnson, like, I think, those two different aspects of it, right? Like having the philosophy and then having, it coached in a certain way. And, I think that, we're going to see those physical tools really start to blossom. Like, I genuinely believe that, because you see it in flashes on film where all those physical tools that made him the 17th overall pick just really pop, whether it's in certain pass protection snaps, whether it's in the run game. Like, he has everything you need to be a fantastic guard in the NFL. I think with the scheme, with the approach, with the coaching, with the philosophy, I think you're going to start to see those traits really turn into production for him, whether that's at right guard or left guard. I like the idea of getting him back to left guard last season. I don't think it ever really materialized, but getting him back to his natural position, and then also getting him next to Rashawn Slater, like, I think on a broad level that made a lot of sense. So I would probably keep him there, because I've had conversations with Zion about how left guard is the position he played in college. I was more comfortable there, in his movements and everything. So I think that he's a guy definitely to watch as far as somebody that'll improve under the new regime. JPJ at 23. Yeah. Like, I think for me, I would be looking at center either, and the Bozeman signing doesn't change this, because this was sort of what I expected all along, was go get a veteran and then, try and find your center of the future. If they get a late first round pick, 100% center, JPJ is an option. At 37, center should absolutely be an option. Like, if I was, running the show, I'd be trying to get a center on day 2. A guy that you feel like can come in and potentially compete, in training camp for the starting job. But guilty as charged in here. Apology, fellas, if I jacked your stream. I didn't realize you guys were going. Veteran corners you like? I mentioned earlier, Arthur Marlette's a guy that makes a lot of sense to me. I know you guys have thrown Rock Yassin out there. I think that makes a lot of sense. One other guy is Tre'Davious White. I'm curious what his market is going to be. I know he's coming off some injuries, but you're talking about a guy that was, at one point with the Bills, like, one of the premier corners in the league. Curious what his market is. I don't know. I don't really have a sense of what he's going to end up getting paid, but you do have some cap space to work with here. Like, that's a guy that I would find kind of interesting if they do decide to go that way. But I do feel like they have to get a corner. I mentioned this earlier as well. Like, I think with the way their depth chart is set up, I think you got a double dip here. I think, and especially now having the cap space. Like, I thought they would have to really, look for some bargains here at corner if they were going to do it. Now they have some cap space. Like, it makes a ton of sense to, go find a veteran, either a slot guy or outside. And then, or, in a perfect world, somebody can do both, or, and do that, go get your veteran. And then also, look for it in the draft. And it could be as early as the first round. One thing I've learned covering the league is, like, you can't have enough corners. Like, I think, Tom Coughlin used to say, like, you can't have enough pass rushers. Like, in today's NFL, you cannot have enough corners. And you guys are well aware of that. Like, you've watched the Chargers. Like, you're going to have injuries at that position. It is a volatile position too, year over year. Like, it's very hard to maintain high level corner play over multiple seasons. Like, you see a lot of fluctuation in play. Like, Michael Davis is a really good example. That stretch that he had at the end of 22, it was like, okay, Michael Davis has turned a corner. This guy has, this guy. Oh boy. Michael Davis, like, this guy, oh, he did it again. Michael Davis has the potential, right, to be that type of number one corner. you know, and you always saw it like with his size and speed, you know, he had the traits to be that type of guy. But I think we saw him start to blossom there as a potential guy that you could really rely on the outside. And then obviously, like, you know, it's hard to put the regression like totally on the player because, you know, JC Jackson comes back and then they're trying to, they're trying to get Asante Samuel Jr. in the slot to get all three of them on the field. That doesn't really work. So Michael Davis loses his spot. You know, then he's playing like, coming on in the second quarter and like, it's a rhythm position. It's really hard to get into a flow of the game when you're not starting and playing the whole game. I'm not making excuses here, but like there were some reasons why like last year didn't go well for for virtually anybody in the secondary. But point being, like there, it's you do see a lot of fluctuation there, and so you need a lot of corners. You need to just continue to invest in that position, both through free agency and among veterans, and then also in the draft, and just keep replenishing. And I feel like, during the Brandon Staley era, they tried to invest, but I don't think there was maybe enough investment in the draft to really keep replenishing. I think they were relying a lot on their own development, their own ability to develop. And some of that didn't really come to fruition. When you're taking sort of 6th round, 7th round flyers on guys, and those are really your depth pieces, that's difficult. They drafted Asante Samuel Jr., they signed JC Jackson for agency, and then it was really Dean Leonard and Jasir Taylor, and it was like, okay, this is our crew. I think, there were opportunities there to potentially build out that room with more depth through the draft. And so I would double dip. I would go get a veteran, and I would look for, at least one corner in the draft, potentially as early as the first round if they do trade down. We got the Powder Blues forum in here, always sending me some great melodic house recommendations on Twitter. I see you. The Ben Bomer shout out. Ben Bomer making bangers. Powder Blues forum is one of the only people that actually cares about my music updates. I do have a couple new tracks that I finished up. I'm going to start sending them out to labels soon. Maybe we'll do a sneak peek later. No, we're not. Maybe. Maybe. All right, what else we got here? Any info on the new facility? Yeah, I think the hope is that they're going to be in there for training camp. Hold on, my fiance keeps calling me. Okay, just making sure. Streaming. So make sure she didn't like something terrible didn't happen. Where was I? Do void years cancel the player in the comp? Was I answering a question? I forgot if I was answering a question. No, void years don't. You'll still, if that player, once the contract voids and he hits free agency and signs elsewhere, he would factor into the comp format. Yeah. Oh yeah, the facility. So yeah, that's the hope, but nothing concrete. Obviously, as soon as I'm there, I'll take a bunch of photos for you guys. Still have to see the progress because last time they did a little media tour, I was somewhere else. I forget. Mashed potatoes or scalloped potatoes? Mashed potatoes all the way, no doubt. T. Higgins, interesting thought. I actually looked into it a little bit. So he's got like a $22 million cap hit this year. I think he's on the 5th-year option. 21.816. This is how you know I spend too much time on over the cap, that I can just pull T. Higgins' cap hit out of nowhere. It's too much time, or just enough, just the right amount. So, if they were to trade for T. Higgins, that would be a big cap hit. So you'd have to extend him. And anyway, like a young player that's on the end of his deal. Think Brian Burns. Trade for Brian Burns. You're trading for him so you can do the extension. That's sort of implicit in the trade. So he would fit, but are they really in a situation where they're gonna, trade for a player and do an extension? It's tough to see that, especially because it felt like a lot of these moves they made with the veterans were, at least partly driven by, cash budget, cash savings. They saved, right, 11.25 million on the pay cuts with Khalil and Joey, as we discussed earlier, saved 23.1 million with the, in cash with the Keenan trade. And then when you do, extend somebody like we were talking about earlier, you sign an extension, there's a signing bonus that you have to pay, so just financially, you dig into the financials of it. Feels a little bit difficult. And then additionally, you're going to have to give up draft picks, to make the trade, most likely. And, they need as many draft picks as they can get right now to sort of build out the depth with cost controlled players. Yeah. Phoenix Flame says Tyler Boyd makes more sense to me. Makes more sense to me as well. Running back in round 3 makes sense to me. Blake Corum's a guy I think I mocked in my last mock draft. What are your expectations for the season, winning or losing record? So I always do my record prediction when the schedule drops, which is like just after the draft, early May. So gotta wait for free agency to happen, the draft happen. That, like, when the schedule gets released, you have a really good idea of what the roster is going to look like. You might make a couple more moves, signing some free agents to add to the roster, but at that stage of the NFL year, you have a pretty good idea of what the roster is going to look like. Right now, there's just too many questions, for me to really, tell you right now what I think the record is going to be. So look out for that in May, early May. Colin Coward said the Chargers are absolutely a playoff team in year 1. I love this. This is an OG member of the Chad right here. Can you talk about what happened between Anthony Lynn and Ken Wisenhunt yet? I'll tell you what, that'll be in the book. When I eventually write a book about this franchise, that'll be in the book. And then once it's in the book, I'll give it to you in a stream as like a plug for the book. How about that? That's hilarious. I feel like that was 5 years ago? Oh my God. Joe Reedy tweet context? I'm not even going to get into that. Love you, Joe. We're good. At a certain point, though, I can only take so much. I'm going to have to respond. All right. Any more questions? Seen any ladybugs recently? I did. I saw Ladybug today on the window outside my apartment, and I almost took a photo and tweeted it out, but I didn't because I really didn't want to deal with all of the responses. I'll be fully honest. But since you asked, I'll tell you, I did see one, and that ladybug was crawling and living a great life. So I did not touch it. I left it alone. So take that for what you want. All right. Beer's done. We'll do 3 more questions. Wedding is in May in San Diego, actually. Shout out all my San Diego watchers. Who's your favorite draft prospect? I think I talked about this a little bit on the podcast, Chargers Weekly podcast, but Talise Fuaga, I think that guy's going to be really good. Now, is he a tackle or is he a guard? I'll leave that up to people that get paid to make those decisions. But to me, like, I love the way that guy plays. I mean, he's just sending people bodies flying everywhere. I just love offensive linemen that have that kind of mentality and are just getting after people and have that kind of violent play style. So that would be my guy. I think he's like a really interesting potential piece at, in that 8 to 13 range if they do trade down. Lindley update. So yeah, so I mean so basically what happened was, Lindley had an $11.5 million base salary this year. He cut that all the way down to the veteran minimum in what was a pay cut. And so that turned into straight savings. That to me, was a clear indication that, it's gone from 99% retirement to 100%. Like, I think we're going to get, some sort of announcement here, but that just allowed the Chargers to have maximum cap flexibility while, Corey Lindley decided officially what he's going to do. But again, like, I think that's sort of an inevitability. It's just a matter of when, not if. And, like I've said a number of times on stream, like I'm not going to like really do a ton of speculating there. Like, I want to, give Corey Lindley the space to make this decision. And I don't really want to dive into like, what is a very personal situation for him. So, but the point being, from a financial perspective, they've gotten effectively all of the space that they could possibly get to work with through free agency. Corey Lindley did that for the organization. And so, like, from a team building, roster building perspective, like there really isn't anything else that needs to happen here. Like, the Chargers have maximum flexibility. Corey's going to announce the decision, when he feels comfortable doing that, if he feels comfortable doing that. And there's not a whole lot that's going to happen as a result when he does end up retiring. Like, it's already sort of happened with the financial move that he made with the Chargers earlier this offseason. Favorite soccer player? Let's see if anyone can guess that. Fans of the stream should know who my favorite soccer player is. I'll give you a hint. Captain America. Oh my God. What are these guesses? There we go. Christian Pulisic, man. Killing it at AC Milan. Captain America. It's my guy. I got a Pulisic jersey in my closet. Also have a Rose Lavelle jersey. She's my number 2. Shout out Rose Lavelle. All right, one more question. Closing in on an hour here. Jamie Tart. All right. While I'm waiting for this last question, do you guys want a sneak peek of my new song? All right, let's load it up while we wait for this last good question. All right, see some questions on Quentin Johnson. So we'll talk a little Quentin Johnson, and I'll close with a little sneak preview of the track I've been working on. Yeah, so Quentin Johnson, first round pick last year. I think, what the Chargers envisioned was taking Quentin as a developmental pick, having him work behind Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, and sort of allow him to develop and phase him in. And I think, as far as that specifically, like that idea of him having the time to develop, I think that made sense. Now, obviously, what happened was Mike Williams tears his ACL. Josh Palmer has a knee injury. All of a sudden, Quentin Johnson has to take on a much bigger role. And I think what we saw was a lot of the weaknesses that were, well documented for him coming out of TCU. He's not a refined route runner yet. He has some hands issues. And then he had some issues as far as getting lined up, learning the playbook, all of that kind of stuff. We saw moments, where the physical traits jumped out. I remember there's 2 catches he had from Easton Stick. I forget which game it was, where he had those back-to-back catches into the red zone, and you saw that you saw the ability to really accelerate with the ball in his hands, be a real factor on some of those slants and digs over the middle of the field. But the weaknesses were the weaknesses. Now, the Chargers have brought in Sanjay Lal as their wide receivers coach from Seattle, position coach for DK Metcalf. Now, 2 different players between DK Metcalf and Quentin Johnson, but, on a broad level, pretty similar as far as profiles, right? Like super tradesy guys. How do you develop that type of player? Well, Sanjay Lal has experience as far as taking traits and molding them into a super productive player. So there's, belief that, some of that is going to happen with Quentin Johnson, but it's up to the coaching staff now to see what he does well and get the most out of it. And I felt like with the way everything went down, and I was thinking about this the other day, with the way everything went down, it felt like Quentin Johnson was doing some things that maybe weren't best suited for his game. Like I think he was doing a lot of the things that Mike Williams was doing. When you lose Mike Williams, you need somebody to replicate that. And so he's running a lot of goes, a lot of posts, and he can do that. But the vision for him was to get him in yards after the catch situations and let him work, and allow his traits to really, blossom. And so, can the new coaching staff put Quentin Johnston in more positions to be successful? Get him doing the things that he does well and have him not do the things that he doesn't do well. It was a tough rookie season, but there's a reason he went 21st overall. Like he has legitimate NFL traits. And so, I'm in wait and see mode. There were issues last year. Like, don't get me wrong. Like he really struggles as far as, adding deception to his routes. Like it felt like a lot of the times defensive backs knew exactly what he was going to do. And he didn't have a lot of that nuance to his route running that you need to be successful as a receiver in the NFL. Can that stuff be taught? We'll find out. What I do know is he has like some legitimate traits. Like he's a freak athlete. And you see it when he gets the ball in his hands. So it's up to the coaching staff. Can they get him in situations to be successful? You've gone out and you paid top of the market for a head coach. You've built out a staff of 29 assistants. You've brought in a receivers coach and Sanjay Lal who has experience, turning traits into production. Like, is there reason to, have some optimism about Quentin Johnson? Absolutely. But he also has to improve significantly as a player, specifically with his route running and the deception that he has in his route running to be successful in the NFL. And ultimately we'll see. So that's where we'll stop. Computer, hold on. Somebody's gonna have to clip that. Can you hear me? Is my voice gone now too? Okay, you can hear me, but you couldn't hear the music. Is that correct? Oh my God. So I was just dancing to no music. Is that exactly what happened? Oh my God. That's incredible. All right, after we end the stream, somebody has to clip that of me just like dancing to no sound at all whatsoever. All right, let's see if this works. Good to know next time I'm previewing a track. Can you guys hear it now? What do we think? Needs more cowbell. I agree. Thoughts? What do we think? Sounds like a mixture of Fergie and Jesus. Hell yeah. That's exactly the vibe I was going for. All right, guys. I think we'll end it right there. Appreciate you listening to my cruddy music. More importantly, I appreciate everybody asking questions. I appreciate everybody specifically who subscribes to The Athletic or has subscribed to The Athletic. A lot of you guys have been subscribing recently through my free agency content. I appreciate every single one of you who, gives me your hard-earned money to read my content. It means the world. If you are not subscribed to The Athletic, I got a link below to my story on the Keenan Allen trade. Click that, subscribe, join. Plenty of content still to come, obviously. I'll have all my mock drafts coming. I'll have coverage of the owners' meetings later this month. Obviously, full coverage of the draft. And then obviously, into training camp, my daily training camp reports. Yeah. So subscribe if you don't. Appreciate all you guys who do. Thank you for the questions. Thanks for everyone who is in there. This is actually the most people we've ever had in the stream at one time. I think we're well over 800. So crazy. Appreciate all you. We'll do this again soon. Love you all. Peace out.